Workplace is a global epidemic. It leads to decreased productivity, increased sick-related absenteeism, poor work quality, wasted materials, and even compromised workplace safety. Now, despite significant financial loss to employers and the broad economy, many mental disorders fly below the radar in the workplace. Now, a more proactive approach for managing mental illness in the workplace is a strategic imperative for all South African employers. Now, most employers tend to completely underestimate the financial impact of mental illness. So how well are we dealing with mental health at the workplace? Well, stay tuned because today we discuss mental health at the workplace. We'll briefly look at mental health in general and then focus on the workplace. Understand the impact of workplace stress, the prevention and recognition of workplace stress, and how we can promote mental wellness at the workplace. Now, we'll be joined in studio by the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions, a clinical psychologist, director of an organization called IAPA South Africa, which is the Employee Assistance Professionals of South Africa, and a board member from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Now, you can tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Now, we're going to go for a short break. Now, when we come back, we invite you to relax, sit back, and learn from this bumper show ahead. I'm Dr. Sello Mateo, and this is Health Talk.
Shield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est si bon.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 1000 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant. A life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
The Pan-African Parliament as a legislative body could go a long way in continuing to promote women's rights in all African member states.
Moon will be elected president. A decisive win by him will provide much needed stability in South Korea.
The Deputy President and the SADC Oversight Committee have been mandated to convene a multi-stakeholder national dialogue before elections.
5 teams are trapped in the relegation mud. These include Bloemfontein Celtic, 12th on the log, followed by Chipa United, Free State Stars and Baroka, who are second from the bottom, as well as Highlands Park, who have won only 4 matches.
We're on point with breaking stories, detailed economy and sport. Tune into Midday Report every Monday to Friday from 12 p.m.
This is Rita Molloy, a 26-year-old from Moletsane in Soweto. She was diagnosed with depression later on after moving back to Joburg from Cape Town.
Rita used to live in Joburg, right? And then I moved to Cape Town and I was in a relationship with this guy. He was my first boyfriend, I will say. I think that was the most relationship that mattered in my life. Then I moved to Cape Town for work purposes. And then we dated, continued to date, and then late in 2014 I found out that he wasn't happy. So anyway, I was abused before that when I was younger. So having said that, everything that happened between the breakup and my upbringing, it came crashing down.
If you are dealing with depression or anxiety, one of the most difficult parts of recovery can be keeping it all together while you are at work.
When you're young and you have older people, you know, there'll always be drama between you and older people, and, you know, people just being bullies at work, you know, that also contributed. That was wearing me down already before even all these events happened. So I was really in a very dark place.
When a family member or friend suffers from depression, your support and encouragement can play an important role in his or her recovery, as with Rita, who had a supportive friend.
She was there and she told me the process of going through a breakup and all of that stuff, and it made it easier for me to reach out to other friends and family to just let them know this is what I'm going through. I'm having blackouts, I'm having suicidal thoughts, you know.
Recovering from depression requires action, but taking action when you are depressed can be hard.
I went to FAMSA to get help. It was something I wanted to do. It was something that came from me. And then I decided, because I was falling apart, why not try something out of my comfort zone? And this is where swimming came. I decided to learn how to swim because I was tired of walking, using the wall to have fun. And I decided to go for that. And it changed me to a point where I realized when I was learning how to swim, the only thing I thought about was me being in that moment and not only thinking about the external. The only time I think about the outside space is when I stopped swimming.
According to Rita, once your symptoms of depression have reduced, be mindful about sticking to a routine that allows you to maintain your self-care program.
As people, we do have signs. You know your body, you know how you're feeling, you know that once in a while you used to love to do this, but now you're starting to neglect yourself. I would say go, write down your thoughts. Be honest with yourself. Do not judge yourself. Say what you need to say. If you're jealous of something or someone, say that you are jealous of this person, so and so and so. You know, be out there and embrace yourself and embrace the moment, because whatever comes out of that is bigger than that.
All right, now to help us understand a little more about mental health, it's a pleasure to welcome in studio our special guest today. First up, the gentleman in the middle, Dr. Fundile Nyati, who is the Chief Executive Officer of a company called PHS, or Proactive Health Solutions. Welcome to Health Talk, Dr. Nyati.
Thank you.
All right, and next to Dr. Nyati on his left is Liesl Anthony. Now, Liesl Anthony is a clinical psychologist, and she's also a provincial coordinator for employee health and wellness in the office of the Premier of the Northern Cape Provincial Government. Welcome to Health Talk, Liesl.
Thank you very much.
All right, and last but not least, no stranger to this show, board member of SADC, South African Depression and Anxiety Group, board member, Nkini Pasha. Welcome to Health Talk, Nkini.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, perhaps let's stay with you. Let's start with you. We're talking mental health at the workplace. Let's look at mental health in general now. Before we start talking about the burden,
yes,
let's try and understand what it is that we're talking about. You know, when people talk about mental health, people start thinking about people that are crazy, people that, you know, in simple terms, what is mental health?
Indeed. I mean, you know, you mentioned that people start thinking about someone who is crazy. So there's a lot of myths that are associated with mental illnesses. Right. And generally, you know, in society, when you say you are either depressed or you either have a type of a mental illness, people think that you've lost your mind. Right. You know, you are crazy, you are mad. So there's all these horrible terms that are used to define, you know, somebody who is suffering from a type of a mental disorder. Yeah. Now we know that mental illnesses are medical conditions, medical disorders like any other, whether it's diabetes, whether it's epilepsy, stroke, hypertension, and the list goes on. So it's important for people to understand that mental illnesses are medical conditions. You don't call it upon yourself. You are not weak if you are experiencing a mental disorder. There is definitely, you know, a psychological and physiological, disorder, there's an imbalance in terms of the chemicals that really help the brain to function in a manner in which it should. You know, so with that chemical imbalance, then it leads to a manifestation of a set of symptoms. And of course, the symptoms differ. You know, if you're talking depression, it's got its own set of symptoms that might be different from a type of an anxiety disorder or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So there's different types of mental illnesses that can affect. And I mean,
well, talk about different types of mental illnesses. What is the burden like in South Africa? I mean, do we have exact figures? Do we know exactly what the situation is?
It's actually quite startling. It's actually quite scary if you look at the impact of mental illnesses in South Africa. I mean, you know, we're looking at more than a third you know, of South Africans that actually do suffer from a type of a mental disorder at some point in their lives. You know, and just maybe to unpack that a little bit more, you're looking at over 4 million South Africans that are living with a type of a mental disorder. So it means that the 4 of us sitting here, one of us, at least one of us, could actually potentially be suffering from a type of a mental disorder. So it is huge. We are also seeing that, you know, there's a high, you know, number of suicides that are now being reported. And of course, we know that suicide is a severe consequence of untreated mental disorder. We are seeing more and more of our younger people that actually are looking to suicide. They're taking away their lives. I mean, we've got horrible stories of young people, you know, below the age of 10 that are actually committing suicide. So it's telling us that, you know, we have got a huge problem in our society. You know, we are losing future leaders. The direct consequence of that, obviously, on the economy, on the growth of our, you know, our society. So really, really, you know, it is quite a serious problem. It is quite a serious problem.
Now, Dr. Nyati, all right, we're talking mental health, but oftentimes you hear people talk about mental wellness. I know that mental health is broad, but is there a difference between mental, when people are talking about mental health and some are talking about mental wellness? Is it the same thing?
Well, look, my view is that when we talk wellness, mental wellness, we're trying to broaden, you know, our understanding of issues, you know, but people tend to use wellness more to focus on the proactive side, you know, of healthcare. So other people, they use the words interchangeably. But for me, when we say mental wellness, we are actually trying to look at this thing in a much more holistic way, focusing a lot on the proactive side, you know, of health. You know, whilst, you know, in most instances in our healthcare system, we focus a lot on the reactive side of health. So
maybe let's invite Liesel here. Let's invite a comment from you, Liesel. You coordinator of health and wellness activities within the Northern Cape, based in the Office of the Premier. Just tell us a little bit about what that entails.
Employee health and wellness, well, it's a government department first of all, and we basically, in terms of implementing wellness, we have 4 legs that we concentrate on. One of them is focusing on the health aspect of HIV, AIDS, TB, and STI illnesses. Apart from that, we have health and productivity management, which sort of fits in with today's theme, because we look at mental health and productivity in the workplace. Then we also have a leg that looks at occupational health and safety, and then one that specifically looks at wellness and what that entails for the individual. And I think there we also look at, like Dr. Nyati also said, it's holistic, it's broad. We look at individual wellness, we focus on social wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness, so it really incorporates
it's quite a broad concept.
A broad concept that looks at different aspects.
Right. So we're obviously for this show going to be focusing on mental health at the workplace. Let's get back to you, Nkini. Why should we worry about mental health at the workplace?
We should all be worried. We should all be very worried. In fact, I mean, the research that we've just, recently released that shows the impact of, that mental illnesses has on, on our society, particularly, obviously in the workplace. We understand that it obviously impacts on productivity. We often talk about absenteeism. So obviously it's people that actually don't show up for work because they are suffering from a type of a mental disorder. It impacts obviously on how well the person can perform at work. They cannot concentrate, they feel fatigued, so therefore you find that a lot of people actually feel, let me take a day off. With that, it impacts on our GDP. We're looking at over 200 billion that it gets lost due to the impact of mental illnesses in the workplace. But also there's another concept that we bring into the equation as well, and that is of presentism. We often say, yes, you are absent from work, but you can be present at work, but actually not performing optimally, and that as well impacts obviously on the productivity outputs. It impacts on how well the company you are working for will perform. So obviously then that really compounds into this negative picture that we are seeing.
But if it sounds so drastic, well, and quite serious, what's the level of awareness amongst employers about this problem?
We are not where we would like to be. There is still a huge lack of awareness, and education around, issues around mental illnesses. Yeah. And in the workplace, you find that, the managers, line managers, supervisors, they really are not equipped to cope or to deal. So when they've got a team member who comes forward and discloses, their mental health status, they don't know how to deal with this person. And therefore, how then it manifests is that they're not giving the support that is required, and they might actually go as far as discriminating this particular individual. Yeah. And really the survey that we have conducted, recently, which actually we've released the results yesterday, is that, more than 80% of the employees are actually not feeling comfortable to disclose, their status, their mental health status, due to the fear that they will be stigmatized, they'll be discriminated against, they might even lose their jobs. So it's critical that line managers, that employers in general, senior managers, that they are actually educated, they are
these
trained,
are very important points
and they
that we're going to pick up, as we go on. Unfortunately, it's time for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to now focus on workplace stress and talk about all of these issues that we started talking about. Mkini Pasha, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
Hindu devotees took a holy dip at Sangam, the confluence of rivers Ganges. People and priests made their way to the banks before the break of dawn. Security arrangements were in place for police forces patrolling on the river banks to ensure smooth functioning of the event.
A mobile museum in India's West Mumbai is highlighting the skills and creativity of residents of one of Asia's largest slums.
That's what we've been doing here, is creating this platform, and we came here to help it develop and to, just build it up.
Welcome back. We're talking mental health at the workplace, and we're going to focus this discussion now on workplace stress. With me in studio, the gentleman in the middle, Dr. Fundile Nyati, CEO of Proactive Health Solutions, and next to him, the lady Liesl Anthony, who's a clinical psychologist and coordinator of employee health and wellness in the Northern Province government, based in the office of the Premier. And we're now joined by another special guest, Kelly Pumzile Manzini, who is the director of an organization called IAPA, or Employee Assistant Professionals of South Africa. Welcome to Health Talk, Kelly.
Thank you.
All right. First, let's start with you. IAPA. What is IAPA?
IAPA is the Global Association of Professionals, which includes social workers, psychologists, and occupational therapists. It has over 5,000 members around the globe. We have 8 branches across the world, and South Africa is one of the biggest branches, which has 13 chapters in South Africa. We operate in all provinces.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. And okay, so basically mainly dealing with employee assistance professionals.
Yes, the purpose of the association is to set standards around employee workplace solutions.
Right.
For example, we have what we call the EAP standards, which pretty much gives you an idea and set up the standards in terms of how workplace programs should be designed, what is the minimum standards that should be met to make sure that we protect the clients and the users, but also to regulate in terms of how the service providers render the service towards the workplaces.
All right. So, Dr. Zesi, let's start from the beginning again.
Yeah.
We're talking workplace stress. Just now we're talking about mental illnesses, and we're talking about all types of different types of illnesses, depression and so on. But workplace stress, what is that? Is that an illness?
Well, I think let's start by talking about the concept stress. You know, this concept of stress. Stress, you know, it's a state. It's a physical and psychological state that a person, you know, is in, depending on that person's, you know, coping mechanisms, whether they are able to deal with whatever pressure that he or she is experiencing in that particular situation. So on one side, it's your coping mechanisms. On the other side is the external insult, you know, or even internal, you know. And then some people whose coping mechanisms, you know, are lower and the demands on them are higher, or the pressure, then they may develop stress. And when they develop stress, there are certain changes then that happen within them, you know, which would activate different systems within the body. You know, for example, then the person would, you know, the autonomic nervous system or sympathetic nervous system would be, activated. So the heart beats faster, they sweat, you know, and the eyes, they open up, you know. So there's a lot of changes, physical and also psychological. On the psychological side, it can be anything, you know, like fear of failure, you know, and all of those things.
But we all go through stress. I mean,
exactly.
Is it necessarily a bad thing?
So basically, that is stress. Now, some stress is good. We call it eustress. And some stress is bad. We call it distress. All right? So the eustress is actually good because it actually helps to perform. You know, like somebody is about to run a 100-meter race, Usain Bolt, you know, he will have stress. That will actually drive him to top performance. You know, so there's nothing wrong with eustress. But what we have a problem with is the stress that is there over a long period of time that actually, you know, potentially result into illness. That's the stress that we have a problem with. So in the workplace, there are situations that may create stress within individuals. And if that stress is prolonged, then it may lead to a pre-illness stage, which we call burnout, and may actually even lead to real illness, you know, where then people, you know, may not be able to come to work, or they are at work, but they are not able to be productive. And in its worst form, it may even lead to premature exit from the workplace.
All right. So listen, we obviously don't want you know, people progressing to a point where they now develop mental illness.
Yes.
Let's talk about workplace stress. He mentioned that there are all sorts of, you know, things that can happen in a workplace that can lead to the stress, the bad stress or the de-stress that he described. Let's talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, like he has mentioned, you know, stress is really, it's the demands and the pressures that the work places on the individual, and they might not have the necessary coping skills in order to deal with that, or it might be prolonged stress. So that would be prolonged pressures or demands, extended, consistent over time. So there's a lot of different things within the workplace. Obviously, intrinsically, you can look at the organization and what the organizational factors are that's leading to that. Long work hours, little time for breaks, excessive workload, time pressures, deadlines that are not being communicated or communicated ad hoc or at the time when deadlines are supposed to be met. It could be role conflict, that roles are not clearly defined, that there are overstepping of boundaries of roles. It could even be that, you know, the person is not well suited for the position that they are in, and that causes a lot of stress. Other factors could be lack of variety, even, that it is a menial job, it's the same thing, doing it over and over again. And even the fact that being responsible for people can cause a lot of stress on individuals. So intrinsically, that's some of the organizational issues that can lead to
Okay, I'm going to come back to, I mean, the fact is, if it's one stress that is, you know, applied onto everybody, it's not, you know, everybody that will develop stress, or at least a problem, and there's some that will not cope well. I'll come back to you on that. Perhaps you want to add a bit on what she said about, you know, these common sources of stress at the workplace.
Well, what we have picked up is that some of the factors that drive stress in the workplace are organizational in nature. What you'd find is that in most companies where there's little or no engagement with employees, where there's high demands and pressure placed on employees without proper support structures. And when I talk about proper support structures, I'm referring to clear channels that are clearly communicated and understood by employees to say, in the instance wherein I feel as if I need support, these are the channels I need to follow. Now, in the absence of all of that, we find that a lot of employees then move to secondary effects and the impact of stress, wherein this starts manifesting in behavior that is counterproductive, that leads to employees even starting to doubt themselves and their input and contribution to the workplace. Now, in my view, what we need to pay attention to as professionals and also dealing with this subject is to make sure that we ensure that the workplace has proper support structures, and not only a toll-free number that employees can call as and when they are in distress, but making sure that there's clearly communicated channels wherein employees can gain support and assistance.
All right, we're going to get back to what employers should or shouldn't do. Let's get back to that issue, and let's keep this open. If you need to, you know, come in at any point, please indicate so. Now, we said that people react differently to stress. There are those that will succumb to the same level of stress applied, you know, across the board. Now, are there people that are more vulnerable, perhaps?
Definitely. I think we need to look at threshold for one. So certain people have a higher threshold for stress and can deal with a lot of stress over a longer period of time. Other people definitely have a lower threshold, and then we also need to look at types of people. And the cliche that we all know about, the type A personality, is actually very vulnerable to developing stress. It's the person who is competitive, who is the go-getter, who has very high standards, who thrives on deadlines, but that person also does not like ambiguity, like to have a sense of control and like to know when things happen. In a lot of organizations, there is not a lot of control. There might be unpredictability, there might be ambiguity, and that person then, you know, sort of does not have the ability to actually deal with that. So that is one of the vulnerable people. People in positions where there is not a lot of variety in terms of what they do, a lot of menial work, could make them feel that they don't have any meaning.
Is gender an issue?
Gender is definitely an issue. So we do find that female employees are more likely to develop stress, but they are also the ones that are more aware of the signs and symptoms and more likely to seek health.
All right. Okay. Time for a quick break. This is getting very interesting now. Okay. We need to go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll now talk about how to prevent all of these things from happening. Please stay with us.
Medfield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
Medfield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
Here we are witnessing the beginning of the end of the apartheid system.
If you did a paternity test on our constitution, whose DNA would come up? Not Nelson Mandela, not F.W. de Klerk, Oliver Tambo.
I think winter is definitely one of those seasons where you can really show off your sartorial choices. You can start from a single layer of a shirt, actually starting with thermals, build it up with the shirts. You can have beautiful knits over the shirts, like we've done with Jay.
This film tells the story of a very, very significant political figure in the struggle for freedom in South Africa, who happened to be a woman. She was Nelson Mandela's wife.
The exhibition is an exploration into black femininity. Tabitha is a woman of color, and she is exploring the historical exploitation of the black female body.
Newtown Junction Mall hosted an epic contest in the cold where 3 top South African graffiti artists battled it out for the opportunity to become the Newtown Graffiti Face-Off Master.
For your weekly dose of entertainment news, tune in to Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
The South African Depression and Anxiety Group, in partnership with Discovery, have launched their free nationwide service on the 19th of October to alleviate the pressures medical students face on a daily basis.
The new Discovery Medical Students Helpline is available to any medical students, trainee doctors or interns across South Africa. It's nationwide at any South African university.
While medical students devote their lives to the science of helping others, all too often the stress of overwhelming study demands, sleep deprivation, the pressure of student loans and social isolations make campus life a struggle.
It's a very taxing program, so often a lot is required of them, and we need to support them in order to be able to do their best at university and to keep them in the country as our doctors.
Discovery is pleased to be able to support this vital initiative as an important part of our investment in our country's healthcare system.
There's a financial need, but there's also a need for support in other areas, in education, not medical education, which is excellent, but basic personal and business financial education, for support in areas of wellness, both physical and mental wellness. We recognize that within Discovery we have a number of assets within the broader group that we could apply to medical students to support and help them.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. And if you've just joined us, we're talking mental health at the workplace, and we've been having an interesting discussion on workplace stress and all the different causes and risk factors and so on. And we continue that discussion with our 3 guests in studio: Dr. Fundile Nyati, CEO of Proactive Health Solutions; Liesl Anthony, clinical psychologist; and Kelly Pumzile Manzini, Director of EAP. Now, perhaps let's go back to you. We were talking just now about, the female being more vulnerable and so on. Now, let's try and focus more on prevention in this segment. To say, let's get real a bit. To say, what are those things then that employers, let's start with employers, can do to prevent, stress creeping in?
Once again, I think it is a holistic approach that one needs to look at, because the causes of stress could be organizational. It could be intrinsic to the job itself.
Yes.
It could be that there is a workplace culture that is not conducive to mental health.
Yes.
So there's a couple of things that one needs to take into consideration. I think it starts with recruitment and appointing the right person in the job, and not trying to make the job then fit, or make the person fit the job when they are not well suited for it. I think it has to do with training.
So how, just getting back to the fitting of the job to the person, how will you know that this is not the right fit at that time?
I think if you will start seeing the signs and symptoms that the person is unable to cope. So if you have made the wrong appointment, the person won't be able to deliver on the output of what is required.
And how long do you wait to see the thing?
I think it's you need to know at recruitment stage whether you have appointed the right person or not.
Typically what happens is when you're recruiting, you subject the employee to a battery of tests.
Right.
And those tests should help you determine their working style, how they want to be managed, and how they want to lead, if you're recruiting for a person in a leadership position.
Right. Yeah.
Now you take that and you map it against your understanding of what the job requires.
Yeah.
And clearly from that, it helps you with having the first tick to say the employee is compatible to the job.
Yes.
And beyond that, what you then do is, during the first 3 months of employment, all employees are subjected to a probation period.
Right.
And during that probation, not only do you look at technical abilities, but you also look at fit, organizational fit, to say to what extent does the employee fit to the culture of the organization? To what extent does the employee understand and associate with the vision and purpose of the organization?
Yeah.
And just by doing that, you can eliminate a lot of primary triggers and conditions that can lead to stress in the workplace, particularly due to the problems around role fit and not being compatible to the climate of the organization.
All right. Earlier you mentioned support.
Yes.
When we're discussing, and now just let's bring in the issue of the vulnerable worker, as it were.
Yes.
The female. What sort of support can the employer give to female employees?
Okay. I think not only do you look at female employees, but when you design a support structure within the workplace, you need to make sure that it is diverse enough. So you need to look at diversity as a whole. So there's, for example, employees with disabilities. Employees with disabilities are also vulnerable within the workplace in terms of accessing support. Employees, female employees are also vulnerable within the employees, and also male employees are also vulnerable. And I'll make examples. Take a male employee. For example, if I was to feel that I need support or have stress, there's always a stigma to say, I cannot go out and ask for help, because I'm supposed to be seen as a macho male alpha. But unfortunately, you cannot, you sometimes need a support, and that on its own becomes a barrier to access health. For female employees in particular, you also find that because of power and authority, unfortunately, the workplace is still not yet, if you look at the Employment Equity Report, it tells you we don't have that diversity that we're looking for from an employment equity point of view. So the fact that you are not in a position of authority, the fact that you are not allowed an opportunity to engage, the fact that you are not allowed to make decisions can also become a cause of stress on its own. So again, that can be a factor from a support point of view, and also looking at diversity as a whole.
So employers have a responsibility, obviously.
Yeah.
What about employees?
Well, I think for employees, one can just see them as victims of the situation. I think it's also very important that people, when they are taking up jobs, they do homework about the potential employer, knowing who they are themselves. You know, there has to be alignment between their own objectives and goals with, you know, the vision and the mission and the goals of that particular organization. So we mustn't necessarily take up the next job that comes, you know. So you have a responsibility as the potential employee to address that. Also, once you are in there, in that first 3 months, you need to make sure that you understand the environment, the culture, everything, and see if you fit, because you still have an opportunity to exit, you know, before the 3 months. All right. But also, sometimes people tend to take jobs that they know that they are not ready for, you know, but just because of the title, you know, they'll go for it, or the package. But once they're in the job, they cannot deliver. And then they have stress, because once you don't deliver, your team will obviously start losing confidence in you, you know. So I think there is that responsibility to take control of your journey within the workplace. But also, if you are starting to have problems, recognize them early, all right? Vocalize them through the normal channels. And if you feel you need support, do, you know, talk about that early on, so that whatever support system that is there within the organization, you know, if you need additional training, or you need somebody to mentor or coach you, you know, take up those kind of things, so that at the end you can be able to, you know, to be successful in your job. But unfortunately, people don't do that and wait until they have decompensated, and by that time it could be a bit late.
Okay. Lisa, earlier we spoke about, you know, the culture, the atmosphere in a workplace.
Yes.
Oftentimes it depends on how employees themselves interact with each other, how they support each other. If there's, oftentimes when there's conflict, there's issues.
Of course.
Your comment on that?
Of course, I think it is the employer's responsibility to ensure that, you know, they put measures in place, that there is no hostility and violence in the workplace, things like sexual harassment, that they actively say we discourage this and that we will take measures. There's bullying in the workplace, which is not necessarily just normal conflict. But I think it's important that managers and supervisors get trained and know what the signs are, once again, how to pick up on it, and where to refer employees that might have conflict with one another. I think a support mechanism is also to have fun in the workplace and to create time for recreation.
Right.
And I think that is one important element that sometimes gets overlooked, because the focus is on productivity, it's on the bottom line. And they do need time, employees need time to just, you know, step out a bit and just relax.
Yeah. The one issue we discussed recently, I know it's not quite related to this, was, you know, and this talks to the employer giving, you know, employees time off, breaks and that sort of thing. The issue was, you know, breastfeeding mums. Your comment quickly on that?
I think we need to start moving in a direction where we become more, look at more creative ways of ensuring productivity. And I think workplaces should actively try and look at either having a breastfeeding facility on site or a childcare facility, or then giving the breastfeeding mom the necessary time off, looking at flexi time, looking at creative ways of ensuring that there is productivity whilst giving her the opportunity to still see to the child in early childhood development phase.
Because if that is not given, oftentimes it may lead to stress, isn't that so?
It does,
yes.
Yes.
Right. Especially in those first few months, you know, after coming back from maternity, they worry a lot about the baby. You know, the anxieties of separating with the baby and how safe is the baby, you know, it's a real issue.
Okay, well, it's a good point to take a quick break. When we come back, we now talk about how to support or assist employees at the workplace through EAP programs. Please stay with us.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would will whisper this phrase, my darling, sassy bomb.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
A lot of us rely on tech to survive, and Africa is already a mobile-first continent.
We built mobile technology that connects motorcycle taxis to commuters and businesses in real time.
My phone was the most important thing.
Africans are using technology to innovate. On Network, we have African technology and social media news. Even robots have heard about us.
Hello, watch Network on SABC.
For African technology and social media news, join Ms. Phumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Welcome back. So how can employees be assisted, or what are employee assistance programs? Well, to tell us more about that, our special guest, Dr. Fundile Nyati in the middle, CEO of Proactive Health Solutions, Liesl Anthony, clinical psychologist and provincial coordinator of employee health and wellness activities in the Office of the Premier in the Northern Province, and of course, Phumzile Manzini, director of IAPA South Africa. Now, perhaps let's start with you, Kelly.
Yes, sir.
What is an EAP program?
Okay. Basically, an EAP program is a work-based counseling service in its purest form.
Yeah.
It comprises of three basic elements: access to individual support, access to group support, and also implementation of preventative programs. Now, when you start implementing preventative programs, you're starting to expand your EAP offerings to now start looking at much more integrated employee health and wellness programs, which is the much more applied solution within the South African context, to say we need to start looking at the clinical aspects of the individual within the workplace, how they adjust and they cope. We also need to look at how the individuals cope within the group and work within the teams. And more importantly, we also need to start building in elements of supporting and implementing preventative services to make sure that all the elements that leads to losses in terms of productivity, leads to downtime within the workplace, and also leads to absenteeism and presenteeism are dealt with in a much more comprehensive manner. One of the other elements that we're starting to see coming into the EMP fold is the introduction of occupational health and safety services.
Yeah.
And that is predominantly aimed at making sure that you have primary health services provided within the workplace. You also make sure that you have facilities, for example, for breastfeeding. All of those are accommodated from your OHS offerings within the workplace.
It's quite interesting that it's broad. I mean, in the past, when people spoke about EAP, people thought, oh, EAP program, that thing where you have a telephone number written on a card when you have a problem and you're under stress, you call somebody.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more than that, as you say.
Yeah, it's broadening.
Yeah.
It is broadening now. But, you know, I mean, the question was, what is it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's an employer-sponsored program, all right, to provide support to employees who are troubled.
Yeah.
The issues may be from outside of work, or the issues may be workplace related.
Right.
But it's that, you know, kind of support system where the employer wants to make sure that, you know, employees know that they care, you know. But if it's prolonged, obviously, then, you know, the person has to use their own medical aid to continue with the support system. But generally, you know, that it is a very vital management tool.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not a once-off thing, Liesl. Oftentimes you hear of the so-called wellness days where it's funfair and, you know, there's braais afterwards and the company ticks to say that we've had our wellness day. Your comment on that and in terms of what companies should actually be looking at.
Yeah, I think just to add on what the two gentlemen have said, it is EAP has evolved. It's more than EAP. It is much more holistic. I think the aim is preventive. It is proactive. It is looking holistically at the individual, hence all of the different components. And it is not a once-off. It is a sustained program that is implemented over time. It's not a wellness day, it's not a tick, it's not a, okay, we have done this. But it's really ongoing and trying to provide interventions that are targeted. We need to look at gender-specific interventions. We've mentioned the female and the breastfeeding female. We've also mentioned men and the type of, they have their own specific difficulties or challenges.
Yes.
So to look at targeted interventions that one can actually do over time. I think there's a space for once-off events, because I've mentioned that recreation is important. It's something that employees can work towards too, but I think a sustainable program that looks at providing awareness, providing education, informing staff about certain things. We've mentioned the fact that a lot of employees are not involved in decision making.
Right.
That is one of the areas that one can look at.
Okay. So earlier we said that some people, especially men, let's be bold enough and say it, are not forthcoming when it comes to some mental issues. How can employers, first of all, recognize such people, and what can employers do? And in fact, even those that have come out to say, I have a mental illness or I have some issue at home and that sort of thing, what can employers do to accommodate and support these people?
Okay. What we have started seeing and picking up is that the number one barrier that's limiting men from coming forth is not only based on the traditional stereotypes to say that men are not expected to show vulnerabilities, but it's also systematic. What I mean when I say systematic is that the organization itself is not designed such that it supports men, but it's much more geared up to support females. And you pick that up when you look at the balance of programs that are implemented, when you look at diversity programs, for example, or gender-based programs. So we need to start encouraging employers and start to make sure that workplaces have much more gender-specific or male-specific programs that make sure that men feel empowered to come forward. But not only empowered, but also supported as and when they come in. Now, support comes in different ways. If you don't have support clearly articulated in the form of a policy, you don't have an opportunity to build that confidence for people to come forth. If you don't have leadership that is leading by example to say, if an employee X has shown vulnerabilities or have declared that they have got a mental illness, and how you treat and manage that case sets almost the precedent and set the standard in terms of how else will respond, how others will respond in terms of coming forth. So I think it is twofold. Firstly, let's deal with removing the barriers that we all are aware of in the workplace, and secondly, let's set up clearly articulated policies and procedures that support men to come forward as and when they identify particular psychosocial stressors.
But the other reality is the stigma, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, I was about to say that part of the historical issues that men don't cry and all of those things. It's important to create a climate, where people feel by making use of this service, my confidentiality and privacy issues are going to be, maintained.
Yes.
Because that's one problem, that makes people not to want to use a service. That which I share with the professionals within that service is not going to be used against me. Maybe should there be retrenchment, months or years down the line, So, and that must be done proactively by the employer to create that climate. The culture within the organization must be an empowering culture, where people are not easily judged just because of the challenges they have, even mental health issues. So for me, that's just one part I thought I needed to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important for the employer to create that type of environment that is actually accepting of mental illness and challenges that employees might have around that. And I think that Kelly's correct. It starts with having the correct policies in place. But it's also about the culture and it's about employers encouraging employees to make use of the support structures that are there, such as the employee health and wellness programs. And really, instill in them the confidence that it's there to assist them and not as a punitive measure.
Yes.
But what's in it for the employer, lastly?
Well, obviously, you know, for the employer, I mean, if somebody's got mental health illness, we've already heard from the, you know, the speaker earlier, you know, who said issues around absenteeism, presenteeism, productivity loss, you know, all of those things, they affect the bottom line for the employer. So the employer, obviously, it is in his or her interest to make sure that ultimately the goals and the vision and the mission of the business, you know, and ultimately, you know, profitability, if it's a profit entity, but if it's a government department, then the mandate to serve society, you know. So the more healthy employees who are free of mental stresses, who are free of mental illnesses and disorders, the better it is for the functioning of that organization and it achieving, you know, its basic mandate.
You couldn't have put it any clearer. The message is loud and clear. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time of it. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
All right, well, folks.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for staying with us. That was our three special guests, Dr. Fundile Nyati, CEO of PHS, Liesel Anthony, clinical psychologist based in the Premier's office in the Northern Cape, and of course Kelly Manzini from IAPA, South Africa. So, good. Well, see you again next week, same time on SABC. And if you've missed any of our shows previously, please, you can get them on YouTube. I'm Dr. Silongo Deum. Until next week, do take care.